Welcome, and we're going to dedicate this lesson to the memory of Warren Davis, and that is Judith Hellman's late husband, and this is his birthday, so his English birthday. So Warren, we are dedicating this lesson to his memory. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And let me make sure I have the place here. Right. So what I would propose to do, because I felt it was helpful, and I really hope you find it helpful as well, is to go back to the Torah Temimah's introduction to this whole section, because it is so arcane. And it seems to me like he has such a clear expression of what's going on. And I prepared the second little paragraph and was able to actually, I had looked at it before and was challenged by some of the concepts and tried to translate some of the words. And last night, with God's help, I was actually able to even discover the phrase that was eluding me at the time. So I'll hopefully tell you that when we get to it, but that's where I'd like to go. So here's the screen share. And this is where we are, right? We covered this area yesterday up to here. Remember 3 types of expressions of leprosy, of symptoms of leprosy. And he goes now into one of them. He has talked about Tzara'at or Habasar. He discusses that here and how the various ways in which it manifests itself. Excuse me. And here in the second paragraph, Seif Bet, he talks about shchin. Shchin are boils, or michva is a burn. So boils and burn. So he explains, shechin nikra maka shelo ba'a mechamat esh. He says shchin represents an affection that did not come on account of fire. Ella al yedei haka'a ba'etz, but because the flesh, the skin was beaten, haka'a ba'etz, with wood, uve'even uchedome, by wood, something out of wood or stone or metal or something. In other words, it got smacked in some way and a boil occurred. And here, this is what, by the way, the thing that was eluding me a couple of days ago when I was trying to prepare this, the shoresh shchin, he says the root of the word shchin, right, boil, that we translate as boil, hu milashon geshuma im shechuna. Okay, so this was a phrase that I was having a lot of trouble with trying to understand it, okay? The word gashum, okay, could come from the word geshem, but the word, it also, goshma, also has the sense of something like a piece of mud, like some mud or a clod of earth, something like that, right? And this would mean im shchuna, if shchuna, and this I had a hard time finding out the word, what exactly the meaning of this was, but I found it in Jastro on page 1549a, and then I found, looking up Gasham, I found this phrase, Geshuma im shchuna. I actually found the phrase in Jastro, which was very, very helpful. So you can see the fact that it says hot and warm, and this is what Jastro says in the entry where he talks about, he quotes this part, this particular phrase. And the entire phrase has this concept, a year in which the earth forms clods, that's Geshuma, right? Then is parched, okay? And that is the hot, warm, so as to form scabs, and then is moistened by dew. So it's talking about what happens to the land in that particular year. So it's this expression here that he's using, that the Torah Temimah is using here to explain the root of the word shchin, right? So shchuna has to do with something that was heated up, hot. Mehora'at chamimut. In other words, it has the same sort of meaning as heat. V'hainu, and what we mean exactly is this: she'al yedei haka'ah, that because of something that smacked the skin, because of a smack, mitchamim hadam v'habasar, the blood and the flesh heat up because they got smacked. Umichva, so now he's explained the word shchin. It doesn't necessarily mean a boil isn't automatically tzara'at. It's just explaining a particular boil and the way it's manifested itself. And when it manifests itself in this particular way, then it becomes symptomatic of tzara'at. Okay, but here we're going on. And now he goes on to the second word associated with this second type of tzara'at, michva, nikrate, and the term michva is used, makah haba'a al yedei kviya ba'esh. And we're talking here about a sore that developed because of burning some through fire, or bagachelet, or either with a fire, a flame, he means, esh, or a coal, gachel, a burning cinder. Ushnehem, and with regard to both of these, that is, with regard to shchin and a michva, kol zman shehem makot triot, as long as they as they remain as fresh wounds, ain't mein klal b'negaim. Ein mitam in klal b'negaim. They do not render a person impure through leprosy, through tzara'at, as long as they're still there, fresh, having just happened, right? Uva ofan kazeh, okay? And when they're in this particular situation, in other words, here they're clear manifestations of this particular, of a boil or a burning, right? Nikraim mordim, they're referred to as rebellious. Limrod merid has to do with a rebellion. The rebellious wounds, and he explains why. He says, Lashon militzi, it's a metaphoric expression, she'omdim b'mardam v'tokvan, in the fact that they refuse, right? They refuse, they remain in their rebellious state, as it were, v'tokvan, and they are still very clearly manifest, right, in their strength, she'einam matchilim od lehitrape, in the fact that they are not beginning to heal. They're remaining, so they're considered rebellious wounds because they don't heal. They're not healing. The ein mitamim, and ironically, this is going to surprise you, they are not considered to be leprous. They don't render a person impure, rak im aim nitrapu, only if they begin to heal. If it looks as if they're starting to heal, then they can possibly be considered as tzara'at. Hainu, and what are we talking about here? Specifically, in other words, looking at the symptoms, the specific symptoms, shenikram alehem, klipa, that a peel, that's what klipa means, right? So this peel starts to form a skin over these boils, but klipat kiplat hashum, like the peel of the skin of a garlic. So it gives you a very good picture of what the skin is, right? It's dry and it's very fine, very thin, and it can peel very easily, etc., etc. V'nikra'u tzarevet hashkin, and they are called the scar of the boil, umichyat hamichva. And again, looking up Jastrow, this dictionary, it's so helpful, right? You just have to know how to use it. That's the challenge of Jastrow, is how he's organized his entries. But at any rate, it refers, michyat hamichva means the half-healed area with a thin layer of skin. That's how he's translating michya. and it has from the word chayim, right? So in other words, half heal hamichva of this burn. V'az mitamot b'shnei simanim, and at that point they are considered something that renders the person impure through two indications. There are two signs of this being a tzara'at. One is the sa'ar lavan, if it has white hair, a white hair coming up, or bepisyon, or if they spread. If this boil, the scar starts to spread, the ein bahem hesker, and there's no need to quarantine in this particular situation, ela shavua echad, except for 1 week. So remember, when it came to the other form of tzara'at, you could have a quarantine period lasting 2 weeks. But this, if it starts to show this, then you have 1 week. And in the same manner that we explained in the previous paragraph, Veyeta hapratim, and additional details, Yitba'aru, will be explained befnim haparsha, as we get into the parsha itself, in the text itself. So, you notice how just carefully and clearly he tries to discuss these various things. I'm going to try and see if I can. I won't do it now. I want to make sure that I prepare it properly. But this is karcha v'gabachat. Remember, this is the next type of manifestation of leprosy here, which was a boldness, a type of boldness. Okay, and he's going to explain that here, and then finally, he's talking about the nature of the whiteness that shows in leprosy, and that's it. So let me see what I can do over the next couple of days and prepare this material, and hopefully, especially if you've never dealt with the subject before, give you a clearer sense of how this actually practically expresses itself and the symptoms that go on. So at this point, I am going to go into the text itself, and we've gone. Let's go to the place, and I have the marking as to how far we went, and here we are. So we, at this point in the text itself, we've got this person who's showing these symptoms. The first type of symptom of tzara'at, and he's taking it to one of the priests to give a decision as to whether or not it's tzara'at. V'ra'ah hakohen et hanega. Let me make sure this isn't the second time, but I believe, it's just Gimel. So it's the first time he's showing it to the priest. V'ra'ah hakohen et hanega ba'or habasar, and the kohen examines the wound, okay, in the flesh of the basar, the flesh of the skin of the person. V'se'ar banega, and the hair that's in this particular wound, hafach lavan, has turned white. Umar'eh hanega, and the appearance of the wound, amok me'or besaro, is deeper than the skin of his flesh. Nega tzara'at, he at that point can determine that and diagnose it as a tzara'at. This is a case of tzara'at. V'ra'ahu hakohen, and the priest should examine him, v'timei oto, and at that point declare him tameh, declare him impure. We'll take a look at the Rashi. So let's go back here. Here, v'sar banega hafach lavan, and the hair in this particular wound is changed to white. Mitchila shachor. The point about it is, if it's white to begin with, if this person always had white hair, it's not considered to be a symptom of tzara'at. But mitchila shachor, originally it was black, v'hafach lelavan, and it is now changed to white. The toch hanega, and just in the wound itself. In other words, if hair around elsewhere has turned white, then that's possibly not a manifestation of tzara'at. But if basically it's just whatever black hair was in the wound itself turned white, that's the manifestation, that's the symptom. Umiut sa'ar shnayim. And the least number of this term hair, even though it's hair, here he means it as two, shnayim are two. In other words, if at least two hairs in this wound have turned white, if only one hair has turned white, but there's other black hair in the wound, okay, then it's not considered tzara'at at this point. And then in the comment about amok me'or b'saro, deeper than the skin on his flesh. And this is, again, remember the Sifra, the Torah Kohanim, which goes into the details and it's trying to tease out all the implications or many of the implications of what's simply in the text. Kol mar'eh lavan, whenever you see on a skin this kind of whiteness, this kind of brightness, amokhu, and he says it looks deeper, and he compares it kamar'eh chama, like the sight of the sun, like seeing the sun. Amukam min hatzel is deeper than the shadow. That when you see a shadow, it looks like it's above the part of the that's in bright sunlight. The timei oto, he shall declare him tamei. Yomar lo, he has to say to him, tamei ata, you are tamei. Shesa'ar lavan, because the white hairs, siman tuma, are an indication of tuma, of impurity. Who? Tzara'at hakatuv. This is an arbitrary declaration on the part of Scripture. In other words, whether or not it's diseased or anything like that, the fact that white hair is something impure is a determination of Scripture. And of course, we know that part of our relationship to our divine Creator has to do with showing love by accepting decisions, accepting commandments that don't necessarily have a logical basis that we can figure out. And that part of it is, it's an expression of trust and love. And it applies between human beings too. It is an expression of a relationship, that when you love someone so much, the fact they're asking you to do it is good enough. You don't need further explanations or reasons or rationales. So, going on. The im baheret levana he, and if it is a white spot, and it could be plural, but anyway, a white spot in the skin of his flesh, va'amok ein mar'eh min ha'or, but it doesn't appear to be deeper than the flesh, usa'ara, and the hair, lo hafach lavan, hasn't turned white. Vehiski hakohen et hanega shivat yamim. The kohen should quarantine the wound for 7 days. So Rashi, va'amok ein mar'eh, and the sight of it is not deeper. Lo yadati perosho. It's interesting here. I think this is the second time in the last week or so where Rashi simply says, I do not know what the point of this is. I don't know how to explain this. Vehiskir, in other words, he should quarantine him. Yaskirinhu babayit echad, he needs to be shut up literally in one house. Velo yireh, and he shouldn't see him. The priest should not come to examine him ad sof hashavua, until the end of the week. Veyochicho simanim alav. And in that case, these symptoms should determine exactly what his condition is. So he's got his baseline. Interesting, right? He's got his baseline. He's waiting a week, and then he's checking again, and then he'll be able to tell whether or not, in fact, he has Tzara'at. We'll take one more verse. Okay. V'ra'ahu hakohen bayom hashvi'i, and the priest should examine him on the seventh day. V'hinei, and indeed, hanega amad be'inav, the wound has remained the same. Amad be'inav means stood in its appearance, right? Has stood in his eyes. So it doesn't show any symptoms of any further development. Lo fasa hanega ba'or, the wound has not spread on the skin. Vehiskiro hakohen shivat yamim shenit, and in this case, the priest quarantines him a second set of 7 days. And we're going to leave it here. It seems like a good place to make the mark. And we'll pick this up on Thursday. I don't want to keep you in suspense too much anyway. And I'm going to stop the share here. And if any of you have any comments that you'd like to make, I'd be very happy to hear. Any thoughts? Is this interesting? Is there anything beyond?
Yeah, it seems to me that when it's discolored and real deep into the skin, it's a impurity.
Yes, that's correct. Correct.
And the hair gets white. If the hair is white and it spreads all over, the person is pure. If it spreads all over him, he's pure. I don't get that, but that's the way it is in the Torah.
Yes, you've read ahead, Harlan. I'm gonna have to put out spoiler alert whenever you make a comment. Yes, that is in fact the case. That if these symptoms turn out entirely to cover at least the visible part of the body that the priest is going to see, then from head to foot, literally, though, it says, he is not considered impure. Again, that's a very deep situation. So, and says a lot about the nature of impurity as well, by the way. All right, so I'm going to stop. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm going to ask you, I don't know, maybe later on you can, why we say Ashre 3 times. What is so important about Ashre to say it 3 times?
Yes.
That's my question.
Right. No, it's a great question, and I have the time to try and address it. Part of the reason is, there are a few reasons. One is because a good deal of the prayer itself addresses God directly. That the prayer is an expression of our direct speech to God, to Hashem. Okay, and there are parts of it that are not. If you examine if you really try and break down and deconstruct the prayer, you'll see that. The other piece is the fact that it's abecedarial, right? It essentially is that every line is another letter of the alphabet, with the exception of Nun. The letter Nun is missing. There's a reason given for that, and that has to do with the letter that follows, which is Samach, which talks about God supporting Hanoflim, those who are falling. And so I think the implication is that the leaving out of the letter Nun is a way to say how God sustains us and doesn't allow us to fall. That God's mercy goes to that extent. The other thing is that it being abecedarial, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, that is when psalms or poems or prayers are composed with that kind of acrostic, the implication is that in some ways it's an open admission of inadequacy. In other words, it's saying there is no way, I'm just throwing out the letters of the Hebrew alphabet because there's no way I can adequately express what I want to express. And so there's a story about this, actually, about this child who had a hard time learning Hebrew. His father had wanted to educate him, and he took him to a Hebrew teacher, but try as much as this child could to learn, the child just couldn't master Hebrew, couldn't learn Hebrew words. And one day the father took the child to the synagogue, okay? And the child saw all these people praying and praying words, etc. And the child was moved to this point where he started to recite the alphabet, and because that's all he had mastered. He could only recite the alphabet. And he said to God, his prayer was this: God, you take those letters and you form them into praise and into what my heart is trying to say and beyond. And you take those letters, God. And the congregation was, of course, shocked to hear this child yelling out, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, hey. And of course, here they are making prayers. And then they brought the child to the rabbi, and the rabbi listened to the child's explanation and said, of course, to the congregation, now that's true prayer. That's what prayer is really about. And in that sense, of course, now you're starting to understand why the Ashre, I mean, there are other prayers that are also acrostics, but whether or not they express in such clear terms the praise of God, okay, that's open to debate. But the Ashre does it in an incredible, beautiful kind of way. Thanks, Leah. I see your comment. Thanks, Leah. It is a great story, because it really tries to get into what we're trying to accomplish in prayer. And also for those of us who don't know Hebrew, but still try to pray in Hebrew. It's where your heart is, and what your heart and your mind are trying to express. Actually, language is just a specific, you might say, channeling of the thoughts and the feelings that are inside of us. So saying it 3 times a day, I think is just, in a way, even though you don't say it morning, noon, and night, you say it twice in the morning and then once in the afternoon service. Part of that is because the morning and afternoon service represent the Tamid offering, the morning and the evening offering, and the Ma'ariv service, the night service, at one point was not mandatory. It was optional. And I think, since this tradition goes way, way, way back, the rabbis put it into the prayers like this to make sure that you would do it because they didn't want you to leave it out. So this is the way they determined you'd be able to say it 3 times a day, and they'd work it into the service that particular way. So going one step beyond this is to say that one of the things we are trying to achieve as human beings is to be in love with God to that extent that the Ashre expresses. We know that being in love is one of the most marvelous feelings we can have. It's an amazing feeling. And we are told to love God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and to take that seriously. We say those words very easily, but they actually describe something very, very deep. And to be able to actually achieve that particular state where we're so in love with God. And again, when you're in love with someone, you like to meditate and to think about all their good qualities, about what is so lovable about them. So in some ways, the Ashre actually describes what is so lovable about God. And I'm going to stop the recording with that. And with God's help, we'll see you in a couple of days on Thursday.